constructionist ones, and I'm just trying to get to where her conclusion statement is. Yeah. Oh, now what truly excited her in a way about something that she read in one of the conservative responsa and also continues in some of the Orthodox ones is the following. The responsum concludes that there was a category between Jews and pagans comprised of Gentiles who regarded Judaism as a great ideal, but who did not accept the requirements to become Gerei Tzedek, full proselytes. They were known as God-fearers, Yirei Hashem, fearers of heaven, Yirei Shamayim, and were found in the synagogues throughout the ancient diaspora. This category should be compelling to us because it points to a naming system that moves beyond binary identity, us, them, in, out, into what Rabbi Steve Greenberg calls a middle way. In such a middle way, beyond the paradigm of identity dualism, is an answer to your question and a path to shalom. And by the way, I want to say that some years ago, we began a discussion, Reb Zalman provoked a discussion about whether Renewal was doing conversions as Judaism light, or reconversion light. And he actually said at one time, if we don't put a Talmid Katan on somebody as he comes out of the mikvah, you haven't done anything. And he really did say that. And so that began a conversation about really what is Kiyyur, and why do we have different schools of thought about whether Kiyyur should be easy or not. But is the dualism on which all of that is based, namely you're either a Jew or you're not, right, is that the only way to look at it? And might we look at some third category, which Chava, back when she wrote this, also close to 10 years ago, I think, came out with the same answer that we're going to come out with in the product, which will come out, I really hope, before next Ohalah, which will be a whole series that will recount this story of Reb Zalman starting this conversation, and the learning that we did, and a number of papers that students wrote during the course of that time, including this one, will all become a part of that volume. And by the way, I did have a chance to let Reb Zalman know how it was going to come out. I said, it is not going to come out the way you were proposing. The weight of opinion is going a different way, and I will tell you that he just looked at me and laughed. I'm sure that the laugh was, by the way, well, I probably wouldn't agree with it, but I trust you to find the way that's good as long as you're thinking about it. So, like the Reform rabbis, Chava writes, the conservative rabbis point to a motivation for welcoming those re'im, that if treated equitably, eventually they might become Jews. And this, along with the addition of Jewish children, is in the interests of the Jewish community. She puts out that relevant namings emerge from the Orthodox community as well. There's a wonderful book by Rabbi Elijah Ben Amozek, which Reb Zalman turned me on to, and I think I did, because she borrowed it and kept it for several years. And then she discovered it. So the possibility of using B'nai Noach, as a name, all this is an exploration of possible names. And something which I just shared with someone here too, a review in Tradition from 1991, where Rabbi J. David Blank reviewed the Orthodox responsa literature on a case called the Observance of Shabbat by a prospective proselyte and by a Ger Shamal V'lo Taval. It's an actual real story that happened in 1848, I think it is, in Jerusalem, where the chief rabbi was out of town, and the acting chief rabbi made a ruling that a ger who had been circumcised already, but there was a complication, and couldn't go into the mikvah until after Shabbos, could he observe Shabbos or not? And he had always been observing Shabbos. And it's because this rabbi said no, not only may he not observe Shabbos, he must not. Created a traumatic situation for that person, and a whole series of back and forth chuvot, counter chuvot, and all of that. So you can see that at some point. So I just want to say, so she goes through these categories, and then here's that section of conclusion of the first section that I wanted you to get. 1, our situation is not named directly by any response that I could find, which is a great way of saying, aha, paradigm shift is happening, integral halacha is needed. 2, perceptions of danger, erosion, dilution, and threat result from the naming of Judaism as a fixed entity, as a davar, as opposed to a talich. If Judaism has the qualities of a thing, it is therefore seen as susceptible to such erosion. Right? If we let a non-Jew come in and do this, it is going to damage us. Right? That will hurt us. That you see, even in the Reform response, you see that. Like a bordered landmass buffeted by environment or invasion. How true. This naming is both informed by and furthers a dualistic worldview. There were good reasons for the formation of this worldview. The introduction of annihilation into the emotional landscape was not simple xenophobia. Indeed, it was a reasonable response to social and historical conditions. What we need to ask is, are those our historical conditions as well? 3. Fear feeds into and results from this naming of Judaism and its resultant dualism, us them, in out, safe, dangerous. 4. The binary model and its resultant experience of fear shape the perception of non-Jews in our midst as other. 5. Some possibilities of naming emerge from the traditional texts. Gerim, Gerei Toshav, Re'im, Yirei Shamayim, Yirei Hashem, Orchim, B'nai Noach, and so on. The idea of a continuum of relationships exists in normative literature. She then goes on to examine the ones that, several of the possibilities, and comes out with a preference for Ger Toshav, which I modified a little bit because in the American context, a Ger Toshav would be a resident alien. Resident alien is a problematic language all the time. But in Canada, we call them permanent residents, right? Which is a little bit more gentle, I think. And so when I edited this for her, I just inserted that as a possibility. Right? And then I'm just going to read you her conclusion, and then we'll stop and we can explore things later. Just find her conclusion. Okay. From this study of the evolution of the status of Ger Toshav, I hope you will join me. This is why I just like the way she writes. I hope you will join me in concluding that this ancient category in many ways anticipates our situation with CAS. While certain concerns need to be explored further, the category of Ger Toshav is, in my view, an adequate theological framing for the status of Ahavat Shalom's non-Jewish members. From its biblical origins, we understand the Ger Toshav to be a position of relationship to the Jewish community on a continuum of possible relationships. Hence, we might escape the dualism of binary identity politics and the perception of Judaism itself as an entity to be eroded, diluted, or evaded. I mentioned above that there are some problems with the term Ger Toshav in common parlance. Beyond the fact that in common rabbi speak, the term Ger can only mean Ger Tzedek, there is also this issue of evoking the American translation of resident alien in the common sense of the word as meaning otherness. I might suggest two approaches to this linguistic difficulty. First, we might create a new translation that better reflects the riches of this term and that takes into account the not infrequent number of instances in which the Jews themselves are called Gerim, so as to dispel any sense of rejection in it. Indeed, Rav Driver Briggs makes plain that the term itself holds the tension of the traveler, Ger, from sojourner, newcomer, and the resident, Toshav, from to rest, remain, sit. Not unlike the large spiritual tension in our question of particularism versus universalism, the very term Ger Toshav holds an internal tension. We might consider alternate translations like settled denizen or the Canadian permanent resident. Alternatively, we might stretch toward the Kabbalistic image of Yishuv Hadat to invoke a quality of spiritual settlement, as Abraham sitting at the opening of his tent, ready to encounter God through the guests he welcomes. A second approach would be to jettison the word Ger itself in favor of some other words such as Reah. I examined above briefly the question of whether Ger might be a synonym of Reah and concluded that in my reading indeed it is. Whatever we name the status of our non-Jewish members as Gerei Toshav, Re'im Toshavim, Re'im Medudarim, or some other name, in the end we will simply call you beloved companions in the CAS. Tell us now what happens. Please.
We are going to regroup in 3 different rooms so that we can go deeper into all of the things that made people laugh or sigh or give whatever wow sound is your personal wow sound, because sitting in the back there was a lot of sonic response coming from the group. Whereas sitting in the back I could hear that. Would you like me to announce the rooms for the breakout session?
No.
Well, there was something we spent a lot of time on.
Sorry.
And that's an understatement. Reb Daniel, representing Rabbi Chaba Bailey, how should a synagogue welcome non-Jews as members, will be an interlochen B.
Is that right here?
Yes.
Rabbi Sunny, how many roads can a Jew walk down before he's no longer Yotze? He will be in interlochen C. And Reb Lori, representing Rabbi Chaya Gusfield, saying Kaddish for a suicide, will be in interlochen D. So that's what